יהודים יש בעולם? לפני כמה חודשים, שירן יהב ואני ביקרנו באוניברסיטת ברנדייס שבבוסטון, ובה בין היתר נפגשנו עם פרופסור ליאונרד סאקס, ראש המכון ליהדות זמננו. שמו של פרופסור סאקס הולך לפניו, קראתי עליו, קראתי אותו, הוא מוכר מאוד בזירה האקדמית העוסקת בחקר העולם היהודי, הן כסוציולוג, הן כדמוגרף, הן כחוקר שמלווה את תוכנית תגלית כמעט מראשיתה. בעצם מראשיתה ממש. זו הייתה הפגישה הראשונה שלי עם פרופסור סאקס, לא פגשתיו פנים אל פנים לפני כן, ואת הדלת פתח לנו ידידי משכבר דוקטור אילן אזרחי, שנמצא כאן הערב, איש התוכנית לעמיות יהודית באוניברסיטת חיפה. ישבנו כמעט שעתיים עם פרופסור סאקס, שירן ואני, ודיברנו על חצי עולם, אבל בעיקר על חצי עם, על כמעט מחצית מהעם היהודי שחי בצפון אמריקה. אם אתה שואל את רוב העוסקים בתחום, בישראל, גם במשרד התפוצות, גם במשרד החוץ, גם בבניין הזה, תקבל בדרך כלל תשובה די זהה לשאלה ששאלנו בהתחלה. יש בעולם כ-14.5 או כמעט 15 מיליון יהודים. תחשבו כמה פעמים ראינו כולנו את הפוסטר הכחול הזה של אוכלוסיית יהודי העולם, הפוסטר עם המפה שתלוי בכל כך הרבה משרדים. הפוסטר הזה וההנחה שמאחוריו נדמה לי כמעט והפכו לאקסיומה. כוונת מדפיסי הפוסטרים הייתה כמובן מצוינת. כולנו כאן בחדר הזה הרי עוסקים בעם היהודי, אוהבים את העם היהודי. רבים מאיתנו עושים עמיות יהודית ביום יום, ולכן ברור שהפוסטר הזה, שתפקידו להנכיח את העם היהודי בכל תפוצותיו, הוא כלי חינוכי והסברתי אדיר. אלא שאיש לא בחר לשתף את הקהל דובר העברית שהתבונן במידע הזה, בעובדה שזו רק גישה אחת ולא היחידה להעריך כמה יהודים יש היום בעולם. כאילו כל כך רצינו לטעון שפה בישראל נמצאת הקהילה היהודית הגדולה ביותר בעולם, שלא שעינו ולא רצינו להאזין לגישות מחקריות מנומקות ומבוססות הגורסות שלא רק שישראל איננה, לפחות לעת עתה, איננה הקהילה היהודית הגדולה בעולם, אלא גם שהקהילה היהודית בצפון אמריקה, בניגוד לדעה הרווחת פה, דווקא לא מתמעטת, אלא להפך, גדלה. כבודם של הדמוגרפים הישראלים במקומם מונח, וכבודם של הדמוגרפים הצפון אמריקאי במקומם מונח, קטונתי מלהכריע מי מהם צודק יותר או פחות, אלא שכמו בכל נושא, ריבוי הדעות וההיכרות עם הנחות המוצא שלהן הוא החשוב. ואחר כך, טבע הדברים נמשיך להתווכח. אנחנו שמחים לארח את ההרצאה הזאת כאן בבית המוסדות הלאומיים, ואני רוצה להודות גם למי שהדריכה את הסיור, דניאל אמור, על הסיור המצוין, וגם לצוות שלי שטרח מאחורי הקלעים על העמדת הערב הזה. דבריי עכשיו הן בעברית, ההרצאה עצמה תהיה באנגלית, כמו שפרסמנו, פרק השאלות והתשובות, שאני מקווה שיהיה סוער ומעניין בכל שפה שתבחרו. אני שמח להעביר את רשות הדיבור לפרופסור ליאונרד סאקס. בבקשה.
תודה רבה. And what an honor it is to be with you, to be in this hall. My modest goal tonight is to shed some light on Yehudi, Artzot Habrit, to talk about who and how many American Jews there are, just to get to one of the, as we call it, bottom lines. There are close to 8 million American Jews. And despite all of the pixels and the paper that had been used to describe the relationship with Yehudim, Artzot Habrit, and Israel and the Jewish community here. In fact, the bond and the relationship between us is essential. It's essential to both of us. And especially this, as we end a period here in Israel, tragedy, Erev Shabbat, the importance of unity, the importance of recognizing the strength of both of our communities seems to me ever more essential. So I'm going to talk, I've tried to make this in some ways as brief as possible, tell you the story as we see it from a social scientific, sociological, socio-psychological perspective. And then I want to leave plenty of time for questions, arguments, discussion, etc. That makes this interesting and I hope fun for all of us. Try another way. Some years ago, over 60 years ago, there was an article in one of the widely circulated general magazines in America. It was called Look Magazine. And one of the headline stories was of the vanishing American Jew. And the subheadline was that leaders of the Jewish community fear threat to Jewish survival in what they called today's crisis of freedom. There was a loss of Jewish identity, there were soaring rates of intermarriage, and the belief was that the vast majority of Jewish children we're now calling them one Jewish parent families, were ceasing to be Jewish. At the same time, there was a low birth rate amongst the Jewish population. And by this point in the 21st century, there were supposed to be very few non-Orthodox American Jews. So what happened? Well, as of 1990, one of the most reliable studies, we thought, of the Jewish population, there was something like 5.5 million American Jews. And I'll tell you what these symbols are in a second. The adult population are the combination of what are called the JNRs and the JBRs, the Jews by religion, the Jews not by religion. In 2020, one of the estimates of the population is that there are 7.5 million. And that represents more than 35% increase in the overall population, an increase in the population that describes their religion as Judaism, and an 85% increase in the part of the population that describes itself as Jews not by religion. That is substantial growth, and in recent years, the rate of growth appears similar to the rate of growth of the American population overall. So, central question, who do we consider a Jew? And am I using a definition of who is a Jew that is different than has been used in the past? And the simple answer to that is no. That Judaism has always been defined, at least by those who are social scientists, as both a religious identity and a cultural identity. And no matter how much you engaged in either, did not determine whether or not you were to be considered a Jew. Technically, in terms of how we measure these things, we do surveys. A Jew by religion is someone who answers the direct question, what, if any, is your religion? And they also say that they don't have any other religion. A Jew not by religion is someone who says, I consider myself Jewish, but I'm atheist, I'm agnostic, I don't go to shul, I'm a cultural Jew, I'm Chiloni and Dati don't fit the American context, but they consider themselves Jewish, and if you will, they have an acceptable Jewish reason to consider themselves Jewish. Parentage, education, etc. Jewish children, it's a little bit more complicated. Jewish children are those children who parents say are being raised Jewish. It's a little problem because some who are not being raised, quote unquote, religiously, are not being given a Jewish religious education. What do you consider them? What do you consider the Jewish child who's in the home of a non-Jewish parent? They have one parent, let's say it's Ima, who is Jewish, and so halakhically they are fully Jewish. But they're in the home with a father who's not Jewish, and the father exposes them to other religions. Do they count or not? So there's some, on the edges, there are some issues. But in general, this is the accepted definition. This is the definition that has been used for decades, Marzot Brit, and it's the definition that we operationalize. I'm going to show you various ways in which we've come to the current number, somewhere between 7.5. I actually think it's a low estimate, and we really are closer to 8 million. We'll talk about that in a second. I'm going to do a brief digression. I teach research methodology to PhD students. I promise not to do that lecture for you. But I need to tell you that one of the problems that we have in this business is that there's no official data about who is a Jew or who is a member of any religious group in America. It's not ever been tested with our Supreme Court, and hard to say what our Supreme Court would do if they were asked to do this. But because the census is not a voluntary, it is a requirement of people who live in the United States to complete it, the interpretation of our Constitution, we have a Constitution, is that you cannot ask a person's religion because we have separation of church and state. So we rely on voluntary surveys that allow estimation of the population. It is probably the most difficult kind of research that you can imagine doing because Jews are a rare population. We are, I believe, somewhere around 2.5% of the US population. But if you're going to do a probability survey, you're going to do a survey like a political poll, which might have 1,000 people in it. That would be a poll with a fair number of people, or it could even have 1,500 people. You're going to have to survey for every Jew. You're going to have to survey thousands, to find people, you're going to have to survey thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And what this means, and increasingly my sense of the part of our problem, is that for the last 60 years, going back to the 1960s, and then there was a scientific survey in 1970, and then there was another one done by the Jewish community, by the Organization of Federations, now called JFNA, that previous surveys estimating the Jewish population underestimated the population. And they underestimated the population because, two reasons. One, the less affiliated were also less likely to volunteer to answer it. If you are heavily engaged in your Jewish identity, if you're a member of a shul, if you're a member, if you donate to your federation and someone calls you about a survey about your religion, you are more likely to answer that survey. At the same time, we didn't survey people in areas where Jews were not 2.5%, but were 0.1%. And increasingly, Jews are dispersed around the country. We are concentrated in certain areas. I'm going to show you some maps in a few minutes. But in fact, there are Jews almost everywhere in America, and we never had the way to measure that. And so the earlier surveys were likely underestimates. That 5.5 million back in 1990, that was probably an underestimate. It was probably 6 or even higher than that. And even today, even though our methods are better, if anything, we are underestimating the population, not overestimating it, as some have suggested. We have a whole series of new methods, some of the most important of which are complex statistical procedures where we use the vernacular term for it is big data. We take hundreds and hundreds of surveys. One of our last analyses, we had close to 1.5 million respondents, random sample, probability samples across the country. And we use the question that these surveys asked, and they can ask it, the government can't ask it, even if the government has funded the survey, what, if any, is your religion? And we use that to identify how many people claim Jewish identity by religion. We also use that to identify where people live who are Jewish. And for that reason, we know that in virtually every county of America, there are people who are Jewish living in those communities, even if the nearest shul, even if the nearest Jewish organization is hundreds of miles away. So we have new methods to do it, and I want to blunt the possible question, how could it be possible that the population is increasing so rapidly and recently, simply by saying, one of the explanations is that we just did a poor job years ago. We're now able to do a better job. So this is a quick chart. One of the things that characterizes my work is that I'm a synthesizer. I don't want to look at one set of data. I want to look at multiple sets of data, and I want to see how it fits together. So this is a comparison going back to 1970, the first real national scientific study done when they estimated the population at 5.4 million. Then in 1990, estimated the population at 5.5 million. And by the way, that fit with everybody's narrative. Everybody's narrative, I won't say that Look magazine caused the narrative. There was lots of angst in the Jewish community in those intervening years, but people were not surprised the population had not increased in that period. That I'll call that a 20-year period. Then we come to the 21st century. There was a problematic attempt in 2000, 2001 to do a national population study. Methodologically, there was widespread agreement that it was a poor study, but there were several other studies that are done. The AJPP, I'll describe in a second, it's the American Jewish Population Project. This is our big data synthesis project. But along comes the Pew Research Center, which is the one of the 2 or 3 most highly respected public opinion polling organizations in the country. And they got resources from a Jewish donor, along with their own resources, to carry out the 2013 Pew study, and they did a new version of it in 2020. And what's interesting is that, if you will, my data are the AJPP data. We predicted in 2002 that the population was about 6 million. We predicted in 2010 that it had grown to 6.4 million. And then just before Pew published its 2013 data, we published ours, suggesting that the population was at least 6.8 million. And the same thing happened in 2021. We predicted that the population would be 7.6 million. Pew independently, completely separate methods, different approach, claimed or decided that it was 7.5 million. and I'm going to use the 7.5 million as the conservative estimate when we talk about the population, at least as of 2020. Obviously, people have been born, people have moved to the States since that time. Now, one of the questions that I want to address before I even talk about some of the details of this estimate is, I could use a scatological term, but I'll say, who cares? In other words, why should we care whether the population is 7.5 million or 6 million? Anybody just?
Or even 1 million.
Or even 1 million.
Because we want to know if they assimilate or not.
So the answer is we want to know if they've assimilated or not. So essentially that is the issue.
I have another answer.
Okay.
Somebody's got to pay for all the Jewish institutions.
Someone has to pay for all the Jewish institutions. Someone has to support academics like me who want to study the Jewish community. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, but here's I think the underlying issue is more about the narrative. Yeah, did you?
I'd say there's something else also. Are we doing things right or wrong? If the picture showed when a fear, a significant decrease in population, would mean that the Jewish, the Jewish community at large was getting something very wrong. The fact that there was not the picture means that despite all the fear-mongering and all the attempts to implant I won't say a fake narrative, but a problematic narrative, it seems that tachlis, we're doing things right. Someone knows what they're doing.
So we need to know. So there's a very practical reason for this. We talked about the people of the book, Sefer, but actually it's Sipurim, it's stories that characterize us. We tell stories. If you want to tell a story, if you want to tell the narrative of American Jewry, you need to know, I'm going to use my simple statistical term, you need to know the denominator. How do you know what's going on if you don't know the denominator? Some people don't like this analogy, but once went, I was actually with an Israeli couple, friends of ours, to a French restaurant, this is in America, and we're sitting there, two couples, and our spouses, my spouse is here, start laughing when they look at the menu. What's going on? The menu for women didn't have the prices. And it was interesting. When you looked at that menu, it was hard to tell, that was a little harder because it was also in French, but it was hard to tell what the foods were, what the portion sizes were, without knowing the number. And we have a similar problem. We need this number because this is the denominator. So anything you hear about American Jewry today, the attitudes towards Israel, the synagogue involvement, the philanthropy of American Jews, if you don't know the denominator, you can't really tell whether it's going up, whether it's going down, whether this group or that group is doing stuff. So the number is not, if you will, important in and of itself, but it's important because it's key to being able to make comparisons, which are the narrative, the story that we need to tell, both for, I'll call it tachlitic reasons, but also to understand how Jewry is evolving.
Maybe also for the Democrats and Republicans. Maybe they would like to realize how many potential voters they're going to have in the elections.
Absolutely. And in fact, there's a recent study by my colleague Ken Wald at the University of Florida that one of the problems in comparing polls of how Jews voted is that different pollsters or different analysts or special interest groups were using different definitions of that. Yeah.
Another reason why we need to know, you ask them about, they want to know where the Jews are and how many branches they can reach.
Yes, so this is the tachlis of it. Absolutely.
They'll go to a place with one Jew.
What?
The Chabad will go to a place even one Jew. So that doesn't.
No comment. No comment. I'm going to get myself in enough trouble. Okay, so I'm going to use, so the Pew and what we're calling AJPP, the American Jewish Population Project, which is my team's project, we're going to say come up with identical numbers, 7.5, 7.6 million. And one of the things that we have done because of the nature of the data that we have is we know where these people live. And so we're able to do maps, and we actually have an interactive map. So if somebody here is interested in Massachusetts or someone is interested in, God forbid, Texas, you can actually go to our website and you can zero in and you can see what the density of the Jewish population is. And as you see here, we claim that there's something close to 5 million Jews, adult Jews, meaning people over 18, who say that their religion is Judaism, so Jewish by religion. Another 1.2 million who say that they consider themselves Jewish. They have a good reason to say they're Jewish. Jesus isn't one of those good reasons. And that leads to an adult population of around 6 million, and then a total children population of 1.6 million. The darkness of the blue in the map indicates the density, and basically American Jews are concentrated on the coasts, both the East Coast, the north part of the East Coast, and the South. As well on the West Coast in California, but Jews are found everywhere now. What is interesting, and one of the things that I'll show you here is that.
Here's a short question.
Yeah.
That 29%, for example, that's total Jewish population out of as a percentage of the general population in the areas that
Yes.
it represents.
Right.
So it's just New York and Miami is 29%.
Right. So New York, Miami,
Chicago.
and Chicago, New York, actually, New York, Miami, Chicago, Los Angeles.
I don't see them. It doesn't look very dark.
The colors here, yeah. And then I see another question, yeah.
Being a former Midwesterner myself, with our whole family, just about Midwest, I'm wondering about the paucity of Jewish population that you're showing in such places in Minnesota, the Dakotas, Nebraska.
Relative to the general population, you can go in and you can, after this I'll give you the website is on the presentation, but I could give it to you. You can go into those areas, any areas in the Midwest, and you'll see the actual population estimates. But for right now, I should remember to hold the microphone. Just take this as a picture for what it is for the moment. One of the things I'd like to show you quickly, and we can do this, is I call it how distinctive Jews are from the rest of the American population. We are not like other people. We are highly distinctive. Just in terms of education, less than 30% of adults in America have at least a 4-year college degree. That's close to 60% in the Jewish population. Race. We are primarily Caucasian. Race is a difficult issue for the Jewish community to discuss. We're not entirely Caucasian, but we are mostly. And the important issue here is not the exact percentage, but our comparison with the rest of the country. We are not the people of color. That's not to say that there aren't people of color, Jewish people of color. There are, but we are not like, again, the rest of the country. And then just finally, I hesitated a few times before including a slide about politics, but it does differentiate Jews from other people in America. Predominantly Jews are liberal, are democratic, and interestingly, Jews don't vote like other people who have the same socioeconomic advantages. They are different. Their political power, however, because they are concentrated in a few areas, is a bit diluted, and especially given our system of government, where we have a Senate that's by state and we have a House of Representatives that's sort of by population. But the takeaway from these slides is that there are a lot of Jews, a lot more than we thought, and they are different in their basic demographics from other Americans. So, what's driving Jewish population growth? Well, one obvious one is immigration. We didn't have as many people come from the former Soviet Union, but we had lots. People from South America, Israelim. We have had lots of net positive immigration, particularly in the last 30 years. Importantly, the immigrants who have come tend to have high levels of identification. And it's interesting, the South American Jews who come to America have high levels of Jewish education, high identification with Israel. The Jews from the former Soviet Union came, and especially those who came to America, came with little knowledge and substance. They weren't allowed to have Jewish education in the former Soviet Union, in Russia in particular. But they come with a national identity, a cultural identity that has kept many of them connected. So immigration is one piece of it. The second piece of it is Jewish education. We turned our Jewish education system upside down, particularly in the 1990s. Expanded day schools, expanded options for education, expanded summer camps, started programs like Birthright Israel. And billions of dollars were invested in these programs. And one of the things that we can now tell is that there has been payoff from these programs. So that's, we got Aleph and Bet.
What kind of payoff?
Huh?
What kind of payoff?
What kind of?
Payoff.
Payoff. That people, well, in fact, let me talk to the third one because it interacts with the other two. We got the intermarriage thing all wrong, at least 60 years ago, 50 years ago, and many are getting it wrong today. The assumption was that, first of all, people who intermarried, that they were going to do the equivalent of turn in their darkon. They were going to turn in their Jewish passport. They were going to give up their Jewish identity to be part of another religion. That didn't happen. That hasn't happened in recent years. The second thing is that the children of, and I'll show you one or two slides about this, the children of one Jewish parent families who were very unlikely prior to people, we call it the millennial generation, people born 1981 to 1996, that those people, the prior generations, the baby boomer generation, Gen X, that those generations, maybe 1 out of 4 of those children of one Jewish parent families became Jews, identified as Jews when they turned 18. Today, the majority of them identify as Jews, and that's changed the whole equation. Yeah?
It's not at all surprising, at least not to me, because people, for the most part, prefer to upgrade themselves socioeconomically. Now, we know that Jews are out of all proportion in the top 1%, in the top 10% of American society, which which means that chances are that when a non-Jew is marrying a Jew, they are upgrading themselves socioeconomically, which in fact wasn't true 60, 70, 80 years ago, but it's certainly true today. So human nature would dictate that you then go along with, you upgrade yourself where you can, that's just basic human nature. Against that, perhaps in the past, there was a thing of people don't want to identify with a minority. But considering, because this is such an unusual minority, it seems that in this case, the exception to the rule is working, and people are prioritizing exploiting the upgrade potential over the minority danger, and that's why we're seeing these huge numbers. It makes perfect sense to me.
So I usually think of upgrade as when I get into first class on a plane, but you're absolutely correct. And in fact, this is a footnote to this whole discussion. I'm sure everyone is aware of the discussion of anti-Semitism that's going on in America now, not just here and not just in Europe. What is extraordinary is that survey after survey has shown that when people are asked to rate other religions and the favorability of other religions, that Judaism comes out on top. Jews are the most favored ethno-religious group in America. Now again, there's the other side of it, the dark side of the cloud, that even if 99% of people are philo-Semitic and want their children to be Jewish because it is a favored identity, a small number of people can create havoc for the world and can create high levels of anti-Semitism. You're absolutely correct. Being Jewish became something positive. I also believe that it was something, it just didn't happen. It happened also because what is now the largest denomination, the largest branch of Judaism in America, made a decision. Everybody talks about the patrilineal piece of it, but the Reform movement, what it most importantly did, says we're not going to schreigewalt about intermarriage. We're not going to treat it as the end of the world. We're going to take this as a challenge to educate that generation and to give them a Jewish education. And so that happened as well. Yeah?
In the sources of growth, you did mention the strengthening and the growth in the Orthodox community, but also from the point of view of birth rate. Is that a factor in the...
So the reason that I didn't mention the Orthodox birth rate, but the Orthodox birth rate was always pretty high, and even though it's gotten higher, the reason I didn't mention it is that the Orthodox are still a small part of the community. That even in the 2020 Pew study,
to the growth?
They contribute to the growth, but there's such a small percentage to start with. Remember, the Masorti movement in America was about a third, or actually more than a third of Jews. The Reform movement was more than a third, that's 60%. So what happens to that 60%? If half of that 60%, the next generation, intermarries, but they produce children who become Jews, that's actually more significant in terms of pushing the rate. And strictly from a demographic perspective, you could call intermarriage an advantage. Basically, Y weighs 2 Jews to produce an average of 1.9 children, when depending on the rate, you can have 1 Jew produce it. But I won't go there. You didn't hear me say that. Okay. So let me just say, first of all, there is now broad agreement. There's another source of data which I don't have time to talk about today, but it's local community Jewish studies, and almost every single one of them, when Chicago, Los Angeles, Washington, Miami, whatever does a study, they find a lot more people than they found previously. And The estimates from those studies, my colleagues Ira Sheskin and Arnie Deshevsky put this together every year. It's called the American Jewish Yearbook. They're pretty similar to the results from both Pew and American Jewish Population Project. There's broad agreement on the size of the population. There's some disagreements about exactly how to count children. My colleague here at Hebrew University, Uzi Rebhun, his number is 7.3 million. He doesn't count some of the children of intermarried parents. But the Israel Bureau of Statistics is using a different definition, and they only report 6 million. What they do, and Sergio Della Pergola, also a friend and colleague, has been instrumental in this, is to exclude the children of intermarried parents who don't say that their religion is Judaism, who say that they are culturally secular, agnostic Jews. The problem is that the same statement by the offspring of a two Jewish parent family would be counted. I think it's a wrong decision for lots of reasons, but it's out there. We believe that the estimate, the sort of consensus, even the lower bound of the consensus estimate is a more correct estimate. Following on that, the question before, it's based on long-standing acceptance of Jews regardless of the level of engagement that they have with the community. And it's consistent with lots of other data. So I'm just going to show you some of the data and I'm going to particularly focus on intermarriage, because intermarriage interacts with all of the other issues and drivers, except for the Orthodox birth rate. So what you see here are summaries from 3 different surveys. 1990 is the left, smaller. The light blue is the Pew 2013, the dark blue is the Pew 2020. And what you see is that basically everyone who defines himself or herself as who's married to another Jew and considers themselves Jewish, that they are raising, 100% of them basically, Me'ahuz are raising Jewish children. It's actually an increase from 1990. But look at what happened to this subgroup of people, it's a large subgroup now, who are intermarried. The rate of raising Jewish children has gone from 25% to 70%, has tripled in the space of just a little bit more than 1 generation.
But why? What is the reason for that?
So as I said, first of all,
that's very interesting. What is the reason for that? What made it change?
So lots of things came together. Aleph is the Reform movement. The Reform movement said, again, I'll repeat, we're not going to Schrei Gewalt. We're going to give Jewish education to the families of 1 Jewish parent. And we're not going to actually worry about whether it's Ima or Abba who is the Jew.
And that wasn't the case before 1990?
No. There was a famous speech in 1978 by Rabbi Schindler, who was Rosh of what was then the Hebrew Union of Hebrew American Congregations, and he actually said, I'm as concerned with intermarriage as my Orthodox rabbinic colleagues. We can't just watch this happen. we have to do something. And his doing something, again, was chinuch. Chinuch. And it changed everything, and we now have the results. Now, a second thing, and I'm going to talk about that because I love to talk, as alluded, about Taglit, about Birthright Israel. At the exact moment that the millennial generation came of age, turned 18, was the beginning of Taglit. And Taglit has now sent close to 500,000 young people from America to Israel on Birthright, and that has had a major impact. So that's part of what my message is tonight. We started off with the narrative of vanishing. We've got lots of evidence that we didn't vanish, we're still here. By the way, 10 years after Look wrote that article, Look magazine disappeared. And it's just wonderful to say, we're still here. I'm still here.
Add it to the t-shirt.
So lots of, first of all, nothing happens because of one thing. There was a sea change. And again, in America, the sea change was that some people called it Keruv, we should be welcoming, we should be drawing people in. And that led to a lot of things, and it led after the 1990 National Jewish Population Study, where 50%, 52% of recent marriages were intermarriages. It led to rethinking Jewish education. And we'll talk more about that. Okay? Yeah.
I wasn't living in the United States during those few decades, but there was a lot of talk that I would get through the family grapevine, that conversion was a big topic during that time. Can you talk about it became more popular to convert to Judaism all of a sudden?
Yeah, but conversion to Judaism became more popular, but not all that popular. No. So it used to be but there was some interesting development,
but relative to like the 2-3 decades before, let's say.
There was more of it. Yes, there was a time when Jews were not a favored people, so people didn't do that. One of the things that happened is there was a period of time, especially the conservative movement, the Masorti movement, which still has prohibitions against rabbis even attending marriages of intermarriage ceremonies. There was a time when people did it in order to get married. That got lessened. And actually one of the interesting things is that, particularly in the Reform movement, you now see, and I don't know what the numbers are, no one's keeping good records of this stuff, but you now see people, once they are married, and often some event involving children, the birth of a child, b'nai mitzvah, whatever, the non-Jewish member will convert. But it's also that what the Reform movement did was make it possible for non-Jews, and especially it's gender-based, especially women who tend to be in America the progenitors of religious identity and the keeper of religious identity in the family, that non-Jewish women taking an active role in the raising and the Jewish education of children, including teaching in Hebrew schools and whatever, even without converting. So that's, yeah.
Two points I'd like to opinion on. One, do you see a link between the rise of American Jewry and the rise in Israel? Until 67, I would say, it's like a never state, one could say. It's something we say charities and old clothes, it was like not your pride. After 67, especially in the last 30 years, Israel evolved into a regional power. Do you see a link that the rise of Israel, both an important ally to the states and the rise of power, has reflected on the increasing positivity?
I don't know what it's due to, but I'm going to, if you will hold that for a few minutes, I'm going to show you some slides about U.S. Jews in Israel.
And another question, and again a more narrative question, has there been any thought in basically combating what is considered a traditional Jewish narrative against intermarriage, which we know genetically is not true? We've got plenty of DNA evidence that shows conclusively that Jews and Palestinians share the same Canaanite genes.
Right.
There's minimal difference in the DNA. So that Mesopotamian Amorite clan, which came here, say 1100 BC and started the whole story, whereas the leaders may not have intermarried with the local Canaanites. The rest of them clearly did, because the genetic evidence is conclusive and undeniable of the close genetic DNA data showing that we and the Canaanite population are virtually identical. If there'd really been intermarriage ban, really been the truth, and not a sort of a fake narrative, I call it.
I'm going to defer that question.
Yeah.
I get myself in enough trouble talking about contemporary sociology, and I'll stick to that. It is an interesting question. Real quickly, yeah.
What does raising children Jewish mean?
What?
What does raising children
So that's one of the problems. We don't really know.
So when you say it's jumped from 26% to 70%, and that's question one, and just link it with the second question, that also coincides with the spread of the internet. And the internet has brought together people who are interested in Dungeons and Dragons and people who are interested in like crazy...
Gotcha. I gotcha. So we don't really know, but we do have lots of other evidence. So we know that these families that say that they're giving Jewish education to their children are families that are members of synagogues. We know that they celebrate Pesach, that they celebrate, they do Nirot Shel Hanukkah, etc. So we have lots of other things to say that these are people who are not getting it. They're not, saying, instead of, an hour of TV time, you have to watch 45 minutes of a Jewish program. And in fact, this is a footnote to a footnote, but during COVID, one of the things that we tried to study was the degree to which the internet was opening up Jewish education, Jewish engagement to other people. And basically we found it didn't make much of a difference. The people who didn't want to schlep to the B'tai Knesset on Shabbos, they didn't substitute by going online. That served the people who were already interested in doing it. The one place where it did change is in terms of Shiva, that the internet has opened up participating in a Shiva in a way, at least from some of the work that we did, that actually increased the engagement of people. Okay, let me just get through some more of this stuff. So this is the intermarried business. This shows what happened with, and I'm highlighting Gen Z and the millennials, so these are the two groups born after 1981, and these are the adult children, and what proportion of them are identifying as Jews, and how this continues to increase.
I didn't understand that at all.
Okay, what this is showing is that we looked at people by generation. So this,
we would call the greatest generation, the one before World War.
Right. That's what's also called the silent generation. So there, it was very unlikely. These are the adult children of intermarried parents. And by the way, I'm using the term one Jewish parent families. I dislike intermarried and interfaith because usually the other member doesn't have a faith. Nothing is the alternative. But what this shows is that for the people who've had access to a Jewish education system, from Hebrew schools and synagogues and Birthright Israel that prior generations didn't have, a larger proportion, an increasing proportion of them are identifying as Jews and engaging in Jewish life. That's what that shows. And just to put a point on it, I'm not going to go into detail, but one of the pieces of the narrative, the vanishing narrative, is, okay, maybe Jews aren't vanishing, but you know what? They're not doing Jewish like we used to do Jewish, and they don't really do Jewish things. What this shows is that these three studies, 1990, 2013, 2020, that the level, that the proportion of people doing these Jewish things, and I just picked out three: attending religious services, Yom Kippur, and how they rate the importance of Judaism, has not changed. It has barely changed. The differences are barely significant. What has changed is the baseline. That even with the addition of lots more people, including people who are intermarried and the offspring of intermarried, the numbers of people who report these things have increased and continue to increase. I had lots of stuff about Israel, but I'm going to try to do this simply. One of the most important changes is that spending time in Israel, right here, panim al panim, getting to meet Israelis in the Israel context, has changed dramatically. And the biggest change, you see in 1990, about a quarter of American Jews had actually visited Israel. Israel was this thing that they, it was Leon Uris, it was, I won't call it, it was Exodus in the best and worst of the English word. And that has dramatically changed. And what has dramatically changed within the dramatic change is that young people, in 1990, maybe 12% by age 25, of American Jews who were age 25 had visited Israel. That percentage is now close to 50%. And that is the major change, and Taglit, Birthright Israel, is the major piece of that, bringing people. Now, I'm going to spend, part of what I want to do is I want to show you, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do, and then I'll just throw up a bunch of slides with, don't worry about the numbers, look at the pictures. Birthright Israel, as I said, has taken 500,000 people. It is the best laboratory that I know to test the idea that if you give Jewish education, if you expose people to Israel, that in fact you can fundamentally change them. And we now have data. We've been studying Birthright participants and the impact of the program for 22 years. We've done these careful experiments. This is a summary of what we call our evaluation studies. Generally, we survey everybody who applies, and then before the program, and then we 6 months after the program, we survey the same group again, and we have what's called the difference of differences design. And what it allows us to do is to see what kind of change the program produces. And what you see here is from these are just a couple of, we've done them every year for 20 years, starting, but I put this one with 2008, 2014, going down to last summer. And the way you read this is that the yellow and the dark, the small dark area at the end, are the people who say they're not at all connected. Basically, they don't care about Israel. Israel isn't important to them. And what you see, the first line of each couplet, of each pair, the top line is before the program. The second line is after the program.
Within a year, within a month?
It's 6 months after. We've done it 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, and we have one study where we've been doing it for 20 years. And we have 4,000 people that we have been following. And what you see here is absolutely extraordinary. The change in the connection, and this is correlated, this is an indicator that goes along with everything else about your connection, your feeling toward Israel. And we continue to do this. This design takes account of the changes in the comparison group. And what we're now able to do, and I hope I don't have to explain this too much about this, is that this is actually based on 16,000 people who we've surveyed over the last, actually 2018 and 2019. And we use a statistical technique to divide people by their background. And you see here that less than a fifth, 17% of the people who go on birthright come from families where they do, I'll call it consistent religious behavior. They go to shul at least once a month, maybe more. They're not. It's not the same as being a dati, shomer Shabbat. They're about 42%. So we're talking here, the majority of people, 60% of the people who go on birthright have a history of Jewish engagement. But what you also see is there's another 40% of the group, some of whom have Christian upbringing. And it's in fact the people with Christian background, including religious Christian background, not just going to a Christmas dinner or an Easter lunch or what have you, as well as the Jews who may go to a family Seder once a year, but nothing else. And what you see here, if you look at the third group and the bottom group, that the biggest effects of the program are on the people who have the least engagement. And what we know is that this not only happens, again, this is measurable 6 months later. You'll have to trust me on this. It's measurable 12 months, 18 months, 3 years, and even 15 and more years from participation in the program. This is just to show that the majority of non-Orthodox young adults who've traveled to Israel go on birthright. About a third of the group are the children, the Bogrei Taglit are the children of intermarriage. Now I told you before I was a synthesizer. I look at multiple sources of data. So we've been able to look at the Pew data, actually this wasn't, I think I broke this up here, yeah. This will be easier to read. We looked at everybody who answered the Pew survey who could possibly have gone on birthright. So that's everybody, when Pew did the survey, who was 46 years of age, every adult 18 to 46. Many of the 18 to 25s hadn't yet had a chance, or 27s hadn't had a chance yet to do it. Many of the people 40 and above didn't have a chance to do it because in the early years there just weren't many slots. We use a statistical technique that enables us to compare like with like. And from in marriage to Seder, to fasting on Yom Kippur, to donating to a Jewish philanthropy, huge differences. I've never done social science research, and I've probably published 400 articles in my career where I have been able to report what we call large effect sizes, large differences. And
what are those black lines there?
Oh, those are called confidence intervals. So when you do a survey, you have there's what's called sampling error. So that's showing the sampling error. You have what,
15%.
when it's totally non-overlapping, it means that the significance is probably 0.001, the probability that it's an error. These are all very large, significant effects. That's what this shows.
It's hard to get those kind of.
What?
It's hard to get those kind of p-values in social science.
It's hard to get those kind of p-values. And to do it not only on dozens of variables, it's not like it just happens on one. This is a chart, again, just to show you that, like working these data from 5 different angles, we come to the same conclusion. I'm putting this up for a specific reason. These are some of the things with our long-term study we call the Jewish Futures Project, this thing that we've been following people who went initially in 2001, but some went as late as 2008, 2009. And so on measures from how you're raising your oldest child, to whether there was a Brit, to connection to Israel, membership in a synagogue, we looked for, again, long-term effects. So these are effects, this was based on a 2019 report, the 6th follow-up that we did. And I've separated out the effects. We call some effects indirect. An indirect effect is an indirect effect is an effect that is mediated by the fact that the person marries a Jewish partner. And a direct effect is an effect regardless of whether there is a Jewish marriage. So one of the effects of birthright is that people marry other Jews. Marrying other Jews is associated with effects on virtually all of these measures. The only reason things like child in a Jewish day camp it doesn't have, because we didn't have enough people in that category to look at it. But there are some effects, like the connection to Israel, like going to community events that are even independent of that.
I'm sorry, just don't understand. Any child had formal Jewish education. You're saying that nobody had formal Jewish education?
No. I'm saying that we can't demonstrate that the effect of formal Jewish education is due to birthright. This is an effort to isolate the effect of birth. It's like often the case is made that day schools, Jewish day schools in America are the solution. And the reason is that you look at the people who are the Bogrim, and they're all married to Jews and have large Jewish families. That's not because necessarily the school did that. They were families that decided to invest in it. They were families that lived in particular kinds of communities. This is an effort to isolate the effect of birthright. Okay, yeah.
I have a question.
Sure. Just speak up loudly.
Okay, sorry. My name is Leonard. I was a shlicha last year. I was a shlicha in 2 different summer camps, and I was a community shlicha here as well. And I was wondering if you...
Where?
I was in Washington, D.C. And I also went to Green Family Camp and Tel Yehuda. And I was wondering if you know what are the impacts on Jewish life, the shlichim that are coming and meeting face to face, like the Israeli people that are coming to the communities and meet them where they live and do those stuff with them.
So actually an evaluation of shlichot programs would be interesting. It's hard to do because we don't have controls, we don't have control communities, and so on. Undoubtedly, it's important. I will say about camps, summer camps, I wrote a book about this a number of years ago, that camps are undoubtedly important, and the shlichim at camps are particularly important, and I think the Saknud here has gotten much better at training people to be there. The problem with summer camps is that overwhelmingly the families that send children there are the families that are already involved. And so it's hard to separate out the effect of the program. Okay, before I lose people, okay, I'm just about to wrap up. So I want to say, I brought in the birthright stuff, not just because I know about it, well that was one reason, and I have lots of data, but birthright for me is the paradigm of how we engage people. And in fact, what birthright taught us that we really didn't know before was that Jewish identity, these WZO the breed, is not fixed at birth. Development does not stop when a person leaves home and goes off to college. And it's not necessarily a function of the numbers of hours of Jewish education and experience, that you can have liminal experiences. You can have experiences that turn on the switch. It's like the Pentele Yid has been lit. And I think that is an incredibly important idea. I'll talk more about that in just a second in my last or next to last slide. Second of all, Amiyut is the essential piece of this. Where they use the Kaplan formulation of belonging, behaving, and believing. Oftentimes we start with the believing, with the faith that one has to have. But in fact, the reason that birthright, the reason, by the way, that summer camps work, is that people need to feel a part of something. And it's once they feel a part of something, they do something. It used to be, I remember I actually interviewed several children of intermarried parents, of one Jewish parent families, who talked about, and this was in connection with Taglit, they talked about coming to Israel and the anxiety that they felt on the plane. They were coming here, the Aretz. And this was in the day before they had all of this fancy electronic stuff, and you just put your passport in and you get your picture out. But you actually got the boule. You had to go to the desk, and they would say to me, I got off the plane, and I was so worried that I wouldn't be accepted. And then I got the boule, darkon, they didn't know that word, and it was like that was the effect of birthright. That's all they needed. And so I often think, as I came into the airport last week, I was thinking, what a shame that, I was glad to skip the line, but what a shame that you no longer got that physical whatever, although now you get a piece of paper and you can keep it with you for life. In any event, the Amiyut piece of it, and the central educational mechanism of Taglit is the mifgash, the engagement with Israeli peers. And then finally, that birthright teaches us that you can dramatically increase connection, not by flooding people with hasbara, but by helping people form relationships. Okay, one final substantive slide. And it's my favorite expression, demography ain't destiny. US Jewry hasn't vanished. We're much larger than we thought. Our predictions about intermarriage were totally wrong. US Jews have not abandoned Judaism. US Jews have not distanced themselves from Israel. And I think, as I said at the outset, that the ties between us are essential for both of our communities. And whatever the political environment, whatever the political issues, the connection, the sense of amiyut, the opportunity for people to engage panim al panim, whether it be as shlichim or whether it be here, seems essential. And I just want to end with one of my favorite quotes. This is Simon Ravidovich, a European scholar who founded Jewish studies at Brandeis in the 1950s. And in his famous essay, The Ever-Dying People, he claims that every generation has worried about whether they were going to be the last ones to turn out the lights or not. And it is our anxiety, about our future that keeps us,
Hence we should continue being anxious because it serves us well.
Right, that serves us well. So I don't want anybody to walk out of here tonight saying that Len Saxe has this, that I have this Pollyannish view that, I don't know, Jews are flourishing in America. We haven't vanished, that's for sure. We are increasing. There are a whole set of issues, but my fundamental thing is that we need to use our anxiety about the problem on both sides of the ocean as the motivation to ensure a vibrant Jewish future. So thank you. And I'm going to go to somebody who hasn't asked a question yet. Yeah, right here.
You've been talking about birthright. I'm curious about other programs such as the March of the Living. Have you had any other programs what are they telling us about this?
So there isn't a birthright. There's no other program that's as large as it. Both Masa and March of the Living are programs, again, that have attracted mostly people who are already engaged. And so it's harder. I'm the hard-nosed social scientist. It's harder to say what is the unique add-on. I mean, Masa, for example, 50% of the people who participate in the college, not the Mekina or the gap year program, 50% are Bogorei Taglit. So it's hard. And the March of the Living, I don't know the current demographics and situation, but it too takes people who are already engaged in the Jewish community. I've got a study going on right now about the Maccabeans, about the people who come as athletes, because they're a group that is not necessarily Jewishly connected before they come. Anyway, yeah.
Hi. So first of all, thank you for this fascinating talk. My name is Noam Mahir. I've been in this world, second generation, I should say, for several years. One of the things that I'm intrigued about is Israel has also become a very contentious issue, especially among U.S. Jewry, to the effect that I was a shlicha and I worked with JCRC about 10 years ago in Washington, and it started then and it's become even worse since that. If the drasha for Yom Kippur and the high holidays, Israel used to be at the heart of it. Now many rabbis are choosing to leave it out because it's become such a contentious issue. And that is to ask, what effect, have you seen the effect of that? Because a lot of Jews are now, American Jews are saying, we want to connect our Judaism, but not necessarily through Israel. On the contrary, sometimes Israel is in our way. So I'm curious to see.
So part of what I'm saying is that I'm talking about Am Yisrael. I'm not talking about Eretz Yisrael. I'm certainly not talking about Medinat Yisrael, the state, the government. And I think there's we call it, and this is the Americanism, inside baseball. So the many leaders of the community are very upset. Many of us who read Haaretz every day are upset.
Stop reading.
But that doesn't mean that we are severing our ties with Israel. In fact, we did a study a couple of years ago about people who were critical. The majority of people who were critical of Israel were doing it out of Ahavat Israel. They weren't doing it. If you didn't
Which is why we say
care,
apathy is more
apathy is right. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be as whatever. I think also, and this may be chutzpahdik for me to come from Boston to Yerushalayim to say this, but in fact, what we're seeing is that American Jews are more like Israelis. So,
in what way?
you know, last week, I don't know what the number is from last night, but you know, last week it was, I think, 130,000 were at Kikar, they were demonstrating. If 130,000 can come to demonstrate in Kikar Abima, then in fact, criticism of Israel and saying many of the same things that demonstrators were saying about, you know, where things are going, again, that's a sign of connection, not a sense of disconnection. We're not seeing, not that it might not happen tomorrow, anything could happen tomorrow, but we're not seeing as yet a decline, particularly amongst young people, of their interest. And again, we have such a different situation now compared to 30 years ago. We have half of the young adult population that has been to Israel. In some ways, you know, and I've been trying to, you know, figure this out. The fact that we can communicate, the fact that, you know, you can read the New York Times before I could read the New York Times because of the times difference, and I can read Haaretz before I read the New York Times, that's a different problem than people disconnecting, however much they disagree with what's going on with the government. And the irony, or the terrible irony, is how parallel the political situation is. What's going on in the U.S. House of Representatives. I mean, I'm embarrassed as an American to be talking about it, but that doesn't mean that I'm burning my passport. Yeah. And then I'll get you. Yeah, let me get to him in the back. Just go.
First of all, very interesting. I must say, I was here about in this building for years.
Can you speak up a little louder?
I've been working in this building for years. Around 20 years ago, we had a lecture here with Professor Delaberto, you mentioned. So for me, it's very interesting to hear like two sides of the story. I'm just curious, is there any numbers or estimates how many Israelis, first generation or children, are living in the States? I'm just curious. Or is it a number that just can't be measured?
No, so we have data, but we haven't right now local data. So we can tell you in Los Angeles and Chicago and so on. Off the top of my head, I don't know the exact number. It's a large number.
A million Israeli expats in North
What?
America. About 900,000 to a million Israeli expats in North America.
Yeah, they're not a million. They're not a million.
900,000.
They're not even 900. And now, including second, third generation, you know, who knows? But also,
Is the Israeli, Israeli 3-bedroom? They count the living room as a bedroom.
Right, but by the way, it's harder and harder. It's harder and harder to know this because people go back and forth, I now have several of my Israeli friends. They were Yordim, or at least when they came to America, that was the term many years ago. And the interesting thing is that several of them have kids. They go to the army. They come here. The next generation is returning. Now, I think there are all sorts of issues, but I don't know that they're driven by ideology as much as they're driven by the economic situation. I mean, if you're an academic, there are relatively limited opportunities here compared to the States. So, yeah, and then
You said by a side remark that Jewish schools in the United States are being mainly dissolved. So you say, or you use the word dissolved in another connection.
Dissolved?
Dissolved.
Dissolved. Oh, no.
Shut down.
No,
What was the question?
The question was, are Jewish schools in America being dissolved?
Dissolved, yes.
Yes. So they're not being dissolved, they're being reinvented. And, so for example, with what we call them supplementary school, supplementary education, where Jewish kids are going to secular schools, and then they go to an afternoon or a Sunday program. It used to be, if you wanted to celebrate Bar Bat Mitzvah, you had to go to the school at the Knesset. That's no longer the case, and in fact, there's a whole industry of Israeli teachers who Zoom with their students in America. There are also Americans who are doing this. So I'm just saying that it's a different system. The day school system, the full-time system, right now is increasing, but it primarily, and this goes back to Ilan's question, primarily serves the Datim, the Orthodox and particularly the Haredi.
שאלה אחרונה from someone who did task. Last question from someone who did.
I have two questions. Are these Israelis part of the 7 million you showed us?
Yes.
And the second question, if you could show these slides to the Israeli government, the current government, they will disagree with you. They will say you don't have.
Tell us something you don't know.
How do you cope with this? How do you cope with this policy?
Well, some time ago, and I kept in contact with him, I made a series of presentations to Nachman Shai and to others in the government. They can disagree. Look, I'm a social scientist. All of this work that I'm talking about today is in peer-reviewed scientific journals. I think we do have agreement. As I said, Professor Rebun and I are basically in the same zone. He's got a very important new chapter about U.S. population dynamics. Sergio is still in a different place. My understanding is that the Central Bureau of Statistics is taking over. They used to just take the work that Sergio and his team did and publish it, and now they're going to take it over. And maybe with the new government, they're going to, there's people who are JNRs, who are agnostic, whatever, or atheists, they're not going to include. I think that would be for the sake of the Jewish people, for the sake of our future. That would be a mistake. And it would be a terrible mistake to treat differently, I'll call them the citizens of Medinat Tel Aviv, and the Jewish citizens of America, and to use different criteria. I can only do what I can do as a social. I mean, one of the reasons that I'm here and I'm so honored that I've been invited to do this is to have more of a dialogue between us about these issues. And my goal is to get it right. My goal is in 25 years not to have some other academic come and say, well, this Saxe guy said all of this stuff in 2022, and it isn't true. So I want to be right.
תודה רבה. Thank you so much for a wonderful evening. חברים, תודה שבאתם וערב טוב.